very strong. It is March 18th, 2021. We are with Coach Uplift Weekly this week, and we have Gerry Valentine on, who is joining us. And we're going to be talking about how to lead in today's world. Now, Gerry, just for those of you who are just joining us, some of you have been on here already for an hour. We appreciate you. We are going over some updates with the Soar app, and we would encourage everybody to go download Soar Audio from either your Alexa app or your Google Play Store. Also, you'll be able to get this recording when we're done. This will be uploaded by the end of the day, and it'll be underneath the Coach Uplift Weekly playlist on the app. And Coach Uplift Weekly is where we just share tips and tools and inspiration with coaches and team managers, and our goal is just to help each other. We know that we believe anyway that there's enough out here for everybody, so let's all just share our tips, our ideas, and what we have with each other, and guess what, we all win. So Gerry, I'm just going to give him a brief introduction, and then I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about himself. But Gerry has worked extensively with Fortune 100 companies. Here's the thing, though. He did not come about this career easily. He grew up with a single mom out of poverty, ended up going and getting his BS, his Bachelor's of Engineering from Cornell University. He got his MBA from New York University and has an extensive career. But what he's really passionate about is helping people take the obstacles, take their challenges, and really reframe it and use it so that they can overcome and go on and be successful. Did I say that right, Gerry? I don't want to put words into your mouth, but
you did, Shari. That was a great job. Thank you. That was a wonderful summary. Yeah, the thing that I'm really passionate about is how do we overcome disruption and adversity in our lives? Because I believe very strongly that there's always, whenever there is disruption, whenever there is adversity, there's always opportunity on the other side of that. One of the things that I have done recently, along with my work, is that I've just launched a book. I literally launched my book 2 days ago, and the name of the book, the title of the book is, thank you.
What's the title of it? Let's go ahead.
The title is, absolutely, the title is The Thriving Mindset: Tools for Empowerment in a Disruptive World. Now, as luck would have it, I am launching this book during a global pandemic. So here we are.
Here we are. Well,
here we are.
You just heard us on our last session before this one. We believe everything happens as it's supposed to. So
yeah, that is absolutely true. I mean, obviously we're in a tough time right now. So excuse me.
So where do you live at now, Gerry?
I'm in New York City. My husband and I live in New York City. Yeah, so kind of the epicenter. We actually split our time between New York and a small town called 𝗚𝗏𝗆, New York, which is about 90 miles north. It's really it's where our weekend house had been, and that has become our permanent house during COVID. But actually, I'm coming to you today from New York City because I had some business in the city, and it's really quite a different place. But the book, The Thriving Mindset, it's interesting. So it was really coming about going into launch as we were dealing with COVID. But the truth is, it is not a book about COVID. It's a project I've been working on, actively writing for the last 2 years. But I could say that it's the work of a lifetime, because this is a compilation of stories, my personal stories with turning adversity into advantage, the companies I have worked with, either worked for or worked with, who may have been going through disruptive times. Some of them succeeded handsomely, some of them did not. And I analyze what is the difference. And it's also things that I've learned from working with my clients. And the center of gravity in my coaching practice, as you mentioned, I tend to work with either corporate execs, entrepreneurs, or sometimes high performance professionals. But I'm really interested in people who are facing some type of disruption. So it could be anything from a new competitive entrant in your business. It might be a major reorganization at your company. It might be stepping up into a new, more senior role. which is its own type of disruption. Or it might be, oh, I don't know, a global pandemic. So all, excuse me, all of those things do fall under it. But you know, one of the things that I say in the book is that, you know, there is a type of person who tends to deal well with disruption, and I look at it really grounded in a question. You know, why does adversity cause some people to break and other people to break records? And
Yes.
right, yeah, exactly, and that is the question. And you know what? It is the same people over and over again who break records rather than are broken. And if we look at what's going on from COVID, and this is not in any way to minimize the incredible suffering that's going on, which is, you know, really something that we need to reckon with as a society, it also is not meant to minimize the inequalities that are being laid bare with COVID, because we're seeing it's definitely impacting some communities more than others, and that's something we need to fix as a society. But in addition to that, what we're seeing is that there's some people in some companies who are able to thrive through this disruption. And here's what I will tell you. It's the same people and the same companies who were able to thrive through previous disruptions and the same ones who are going to thrive through the future disruptions.
Yes.
In my book, I analyze, like, what are the things that we either do during those times of disruption, or what are the things we do in advance to prepare ourselves for thriving through disruption. And I boil it down to 11 specific dimensions I call of the thriving mindset, which is a lot what allows us to find that opportunity that's always on the other side of disruption.
Right. Awesome. So, okay, that's a lot to unpack. But I think in the end, right, I agree with you 100% that, and I love the fact that you're bringing to light that it isn't just personal either. The people who are personally know how to overcome challenges, obstacles. It's also in the corporate world or in teams even. We have a lot of people who are team managers who listen to this, as well as the replays. And so what are some of those areas or mindsets?
Yep, exactly.
that you
exactly.
Identify?
Yeah, exactly. So Shari, you pointed out something that's very accurate. So you can think of this on multiple levels. You can think of it from the individual standpoint, those individuals who are able to overcome disruption. You can think of it from the leader standpoint. So there's certain leaders that are very skilled at helping their teams overcome disruption. You can think of it on the organizational standpoint. So there's certain organizations that are good at it. And you can even think of it as on a broad, societal standpoint. There are certain societies that are better at overcoming disruption. So as I mentioned, I think there are 11 dimensions. The first thing that I talk about in the book is this notion of what causes people to break rather than break records. And it's something I call the adversity, fear, paralysis cycle. And this is how it works. So whenever we're faced with a disruption or some type of adversity, the natural response to that is fear. And it's the fear that we won't be able to meet whatever the demands of the disruption are. And there's actually nothing wrong with the fear. The problem is when that fear turns into a type of paralysis, which is an inability to respond productively to the disruption. And the problem with paralysis is that either that initial adversity gets worse or a new adversity arises. So, you know, an example that I always talk about to people, help people understand this, is a corporate example. So the company Kodak. So Kodak went bankrupt in 2012 after over a century in business. Now, many people would say that this happened because of digital photography. The digital photography rewrote the industry. But Shari, do you know who invented the first digital camera?
I don't know who.
Most people don't. Kodak. A Kodak engineer invented the first digital camera back in 1975. So it leads to the question of, how could this possibly happen? How could a company be undone by its own invention? And the reason that happened is this cycle, the adversity, fear, paralysis cycle. So when presented with a disruptive technology, which was digital photography, Kodak's leaders, who were men who only understood the film business, who had grown up and spent their entire lives in the film business, responded with fear. Now, their fear is understandable because back in the day, for those of us who are old enough like me to remember, we tended to take our pictures on Kodak film, often with Kodak cameras. You took that film to the drugstore where the film was developed with Kodak chemicals. And then in a week, you went back and got your pictures on Kodak paper. So now you have an invention that threatens the Kodak value chain at every step in the life cycle. So it's easy to think about reacting with fear. And the guy who invented the first digital camera, his name is Steve Sasson, and he was written up in the Times not long ago speaking about what those days were like when he could not get anyone to pay attention to his invention. And he's going to senior management, and he's literally in desperation trying to explain to people, now you ready for this, that his invention was not just about taking pictures. This might someday make it possible to send photographs over the phone line. Now think about that.
That blew their minds, right? They're like, no!
Right, exactly.
I still don't understand how this works. I don't care.
But it works, right?
No fear.
And frankly, neither could they, right? So instead of embracing this invention, they responded with a paralysis, which was to step away from the invention. And we all know how this story ended, right? The competition stepped in, digital photography evolved. Eventually, Kodak did make forays into the digital photography world, but it was too late. And the competition had an insurmountable lead, and this is what happens. So the answer to this cycle is the next thing that I talk about in the book. And it's taking something that I call as a courageous leap. And what we need to learn is that every time we feel that fear that naturally comes with adversity and disruption, it's also a signal that we're standing in front of an opportunity. And we can learn to use that fear as a type of springboard to leap out of that adversity, fear, paralysis, fear cycle and into that new opportunity. And I call that taking a courageous leap. And this thing that I call the thriving mindset is all about taking those courageous leaps. And these 11 dimensions are about how we prepare ourselves beforehand to take those courageous leaps. And then when we're in that adversity, fear, paralysis place, what do we need to do to actually take the leap?
I love it. I love it. I was thinking about in the 2000s, I worked in the auto industry. Same thing, and convincing auto dealers that have done traditional advertising in the newspaper that they would sell cars on this thing called the internet. And so many of them thought it was a fad, and they were like, all my customers were referred to me. They would never go online and buy a car. They trust me. And we're like, right. And then more or less sell a used car online. Oh, that was never going to happen. But then in the crash, the dealers that made it were the ones, like you're saying, took that courageous leap into this newfound world of advertising. But the ones who were stuck in fear and fear of losing what they had, they ended up losing everything they had. So I totally understand what you're describing here, Gerry. And you're right, industries, but people, and I think if we're on this call and people are listening to this, we have so many coaches who coach people through this. I think your book and what you're talking about can help them be a better coach as well, just by understanding these.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So my book is structured as a hands-on guide to help people understand the thriving mindset and to take these courageous leaps. And one of the things I do in the book is I provide an assessment. So it's a short questionnaire that asks a bunch of ratings questions. And at the end, you can either use a hard copy questionnaire in the book, or if you purchase a book, there's a link in the book where you can download an automated version, and it totals up your score. And what it does is it looks at your capabilities today in each of the 11 dimensions that make up this thriving mindset. So then you know where to go. And I will tell you, so this book is really, and that assessment is really a compilation of everything I've learned over the 10 years I've been running my coaching business, the 30 years that I spent as a Fortune 100 leader, and really, frankly, my life journey, where I've had to learn some of these for myself personally. And these questions are questions that, frankly, I have asked clients again and again for a decade, and now realize, okay, there's a pattern here. And so the point is to help people, to help them understand like where to look, which of these dimensions do you need to think about for you, and where are you already strong? Yeah, I did it as an assessment. So that's how this kind of tool for creating empowerment for yourself, which is what this is all about, during these times of disruption, so that you can be the one who breaks records rather than is broken.
Fabulous, fabulous. So let me ask you this, Gerry. When people are resistant to change, and yes, fear obviously is one of the major things, but how else can we help people through, from your perspective and your knowledge, how else can we help people accept change and to move faster through change in times where things are uncertain? Is there anything that you can, a nugget you can give us?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if we had time, I would give you 11 nuggets, but what I'm going to zero in. I'm going to zero in. But I'm going to zero in on two of them that I talk about at length in the book. So the first one is really this place of fear, is to zoom in on that. So people tend to be afraid of fear, and we have a society that has taught us that you need to be strong and fearless, and that fearless leader. And I think that's a myth, and I think that's really where the resistance starts. So what I tell people is that, you know what, if you're not afraid, you're not paying attention, or maybe you're psychotic. Like that, those are the only two reasons. I mean, looking around right now, like if you're not afraid, okay, something's wrong. So right. the key is to get people to embrace that fear. And for leaders, I tell them that, you know what, one of the strongest ways to lead is to admit that, you know what, I'm afraid too. I know that everybody here is afraid. I'm afraid too, but we're going to get through this. And to learn to embrace that fear as that type of teacher. So one of the things I will tell you, I'll actually tell you three. The key is, it's not about being fearless. Courageousness is not about being fearless. Courageous leadership is about being afraid and then deciding what's more important than the fact that you're afraid. So truly courageous people are able to sit in their fear and then make a decision about, okay, yes, I'm afraid. I'm really afraid right now, but what's more important than what I'm afraid of? And that's a way to lead your team to think about that. So then the next nugget I will give you is something that I call, it's a whole chapter in the book, I call it thriving through failure. And it's a little bit of a play on words, because we think, like, the first impulse is that, okay, I'm going to thrive through my failures. I'm going to push through my failures. But that's not what I mean. What I mean is using failure as a tool to thrive. Now, the reason I bring that up now is that typically this fear is about a fear of failure. Like, I'm afraid I'm going to try something and I'm going to fail, or however I try to get through this situation, I'm going to fail. You know, once again, our society tends to take a dim view of failure. We think of people as, we sometimes label people as failures. So I think that label is misguided. I once worked with a leader who proudly proclaimed at our first meeting, "I have never failed at anything," to which I thought, wow, okay, this is going to be an interesting ride. And in point of fact, it was. He was a terrible leader. He tended to decimate his department. He was the first person to point a finger of blame such that he would not fail. In order to not fail, we have to either not try, or we have to dodge the lessons that come from our failures.
Yes, I think, isn't that really ego? I mean, that would be.
It can be ego. It can be fear. It can be ego. It can be a ton of things. To take people out of that stuck place, what we really need to do is go into those failures, or complete that story of what you think will happen if you fail. And when you do that, then you can unearth the lessons. And then you can construct what I talk about in the book as intelligent experiments, such that you can fail, learn the lessons, maybe take a couple of bumps and bruises, but come out better on the other end of the failure. As a leader, one of the things that your responsibility, particularly at times of challenge and disruption, is to help your people construct intelligent experiments, and then to be there for them if those experiments go awry, and to really be that. Yes, exactly, to offer that light. And there are many tools to do that. Again, we don't have time to get into that today, but it's what I talk about in the book. It's like, this is how you thrive through failure, not meaning push through failure, meaning use failure as a tool to then thrive at times of disruption.
Gerry, I'm just thinking about your background and where you came from and now how you help people. Can you share with us when that happened for you, when that switch happened for you?
Yeah, like this is a question I get all the time. Like, when was that magic moment when things changed for you? And the truth is, there was no magic moment. It was many years of many lessons, some of them very hard won, about what these day-to-day practices are. And it's about it. And there was no magic moment for me. I personally do not believe there's going to be a magic moment for anybody else. If someone has that magic moment, please tell me, because I don't, then I'll read your book, because I don't think it exists. But what I do think is that every day we can do things, we can put things in place to either deal with what we're going through at the moment, or to prepare ourselves for that future disruption. Because this is the thing, disruption is just a part of life. And what I talk about in the book is we are, COVID-19 aside, we are living through the most disruptive time in human history. So people, even long before, when COVID hit, we had, certainly, the working class Americans have felt a tremendous amount of pressure as automation has, decimated many working class jobs, good paying factory jobs that no longer exist. However, higher income workers are now feeling the stress. McKinsey did an estimate not long ago that 30% of what a CEO does could actually be automated with currently available, technology. Now, it's not that I expect that we're going to see robot CEOs running around anytime soon. But what I do think is going to happen is that even up to the C-suite level, people are going to be expected to evolve and to learn new technologies and to accelerate how we work in the world and to leap up to higher and higher levels. And what I think history is going to show is that COVID, in addition to the terrible death toll, the horrible loss of life, the health impact, the economic impact, it's also going to be an accelerator for these forces of change. Because the way that people who are successful and companies have been successful during this difficult time have managed to do it is that they have harnessed the forces of change that were already in place and accelerated. So one great example is remote work. Well, that was already here. It's just been accelerated. And the people who had put, it's accepted because there was no choice.
Yes, there was no choice.
And the people who had the thriving mindset, who were better able to embrace it and understand how to work with it, are the ones who are doing much better now.
Makes sense.
They're the ones who did better in previous disruptions, and P.S., they're going to be the ones who continue to excel in the future disruptions that are to come. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. When I first went out on my own, one of the things I used to say was adopt, adapt. And those who can adopt and adapt are those who are going to be successful in the next decade. That was a decade ago. So, and now it's same holds true, right? Those who can adopt and adapt, and that's what you're saying, be able to really work their way through and be present, right? As coaches, I think talking to corporations and individuals and accepting the challenges of today, but the opportunities of today. I mean, I just see the opportunity for all of us.
Right, there is. So let me give you something, Shari, and I'll give people this. So one of the ways I think to help people and companies accept and adopt and grow is by giving them an understanding, a framework for what's going on. So one of the things I talk about very early on in the book is analyzing what's going on around us. Now, again, this was written pre-COVID, and I believe that COVID just accelerated everything that we're seeing. So I think that there are 4 forces of change that we're seeing going on around us. So the first one is advanced computerization, right? So we're all walking around with cell phones in our pockets. Some of us like me have an Apple Watch on your wrist. That's actually a mini computer. Your cell phone or your Apple Watch has more computer power than was used to put the first Apollo missions on the moon. And then computers are just getting faster and smaller. So there's a concept now that's been successfully tested called quantum computing, which promises to have computers of tomorrow that are millions of times faster than what we're doing today. So advanced computerization, first thing. Second thing is artificial intelligence. So it's not just that computers are getting faster and smaller and cheaper, they're getting better. And so computers are now able to do things that we once thought were uniquely human. So we now have artificial intelligence technology that can read CAT scans for cancer more accurately than a human radiologist. Now that's an incredible thing. And again, it's not that we're going to have robot physicians running around, but what we will have is doctors assisted by artificial intelligence who are able to do more and more, but that means doctors will be expected to come up to speed faster. The third dimension or force of change that we're seeing is mass interconnectivity. So, Shari, you'd mentioned the internet and how your previous clients had hesitance to go on the internet, but we now see that the internet is a normal way of life, and so that is we are all connected to one another, and they're both positive and negative parts of that. And then the fourth force of change is what I call a shrinking world. So we are now in a world where any of us who has an iPhone or an Apple Watch or a computer can communicate with anybody else on the face of the planet, communicate and collaborate with anybody else on the face of the planet who has a similar device. What that means is that previous geographic barriers to productivity and collaboration have collapsed. That means more competition. That means that we have literally a flattened world. So to come back to your question, Shari, one of the ways that I find is helpful to get individuals, leaders, and especially organizations to understand these concepts is to give them a framework. And I think that framework of those 4 forces of change really helps kick people off, because then it gives you a way to think about what's going on. Shari, I think you're muted.
Yes, I was having some connectivity issues. So I was trying to slow that down a little bit. Yes, I think that is so important, is setting them up in today's world. I read somewhere that human knowledge is doubling every 12 hours now. I mean, it used to be like every year. Now it's every 12 hours. Think and see, of course, I think of it as the opportunity. And some people, though, to your point, that could analysis paralysis, fear, stop them over team members who are listening to this, understanding that can be scary. First of all, validating that is, if that isn't a fear, we have no idea what could come. But there's also a huge opportunity in that, and learning to embrace that opportunity and embrace the fact that things are changing so quickly is really going to be a needed skill.
Right.
to thrive,
Right.
according to what, if I'm listening to what you're saying.
You got it, Shari. That's it precisely. And so now what you've done is you've given me a perfect intro for one of the other dimensions of thriving. So we're not going to make it through all 11, but we're going to make it. We're going to make it through a few here, though, and I really like this. So one of the dimensions I speak about is intellectual capital, cultivating intellectual capital. So we used to believe that an education was something that you acquired in the first 18 to 25 years of life, depending on what your avocation was, and that education provided you with skills that would make you productive for the next 40, 30, 40, 50 years of your working lifetime, and actually your time on this planet as a productive citizen. That is no longer a realistic proposition, because human knowledge is escalating at the pace that it is. There is no way that you can develop a set of skills in the first 18 to 25 years of life that's going to make you productive. So that means that we have to constantly be upgrading and up-leveling our skill set. So I will give you a perfect example, and it's something that I talk about in the book and that happened to me in the process of writing this book. So if you'd spoken to me 10 years ago, I never would have told you that I'd write a book. And in fact, if you'd asked me, told me, Gerry, I think someday you're gonna write a book, I would have said, that's preposterous. For one thing, I have an undergrad in electrical and computer engineering. There were no English classes in my college curriculum. I spent most of my time in laboratories or in front of a computer. I have not taken an English class since high school. And I actually did not believe that A, I was a good writer, or that B, that I liked to write. When I started my coaching business, I quickly came to realize that I needed to write blogs. And my first reaction was like, oh, really? Are you kidding me? So this guy is my web developer who first told me this, and web developer of all people, and he has a lot of coaches as clients. And he's like, yeah, you kind of, all my clients need blogs. And, oh my God, Kevin, how long? Well, we wanted 400 to 1,200 words. And I'm like, oh my God, all right. You know what? I really, really want this business to work. Okay, so I will buckle down and I will do this. And then I discovered, you know what? I kind of don't hate this. Actually, I kind of like this. What is this writing thing about? I proceeded to hire a writing coach, not for, to give me perfect grammar, punctuation, and spelling, none of which I have and none of which I will ever have, but to help me understand what this is and how does one write. The truth is, I really like writing. I cannot believe that I did not know about this before. I cannot believe no one told me that this is what writing is about. But in order to be successful as an entrepreneur, I needed a skill that I did not learn in engineering school, and I did not learn in MBA school, because the type of writing you do in MBA school is very different. It is not what one would use to business school writing, is what one would use to write a book. But it was necessary for me at age 57 to learn an entirely new skill set. And guess what? It's fun to learn new skill sets. Yeah. And so that is one of the things that, and I think a lot of people shy away from, is they feel like, okay, I'm 10 years into my career, 20 years into my career, 25, 30 years into my career, I'm done learning, I just need to coast. That's not going to work. You will find yourself quickly outgunned, because the world, as you mentioned, Shari, human knowledge is expanding at such a pace that your skill set will become obsolete.
Couple of things there. First of all, coaches need a coach, right? Coaches need a coach. I think that is one of the first things. And if you're a coach and listening to this and you haven't hired a coach and you're wondering why you're probably not getting clients, go hire a coach. By the way, Soar.com has them for you. Second of all, I heard you say is, man, I think it comes down to limiting beliefs. What we believe to be true and what is actually true are often two different things. Just because you're 57 or any age doesn't mean you can't go learn something new, and stay relevant. Thrive, as you would probably say, Jerry, right? I think there's so many people that we put our own limiting beliefs around anything, right? We have beliefs around certain things, how things are supposed to be. I call it the white picket fence theory, right? Like you're supposed to get married, have 2 kids, go to college, get a job, and get a house and a white picket fence. And very few people have that life, but we have these beliefs around it. And so in order for us to thrive, you got me all excited. So in order for us to thrive, we really have to understand that the only limits we put, and it's so funny, I put this on Facebook this morning, the only limits that we put on the only thing we should really fear is the limit that we put on ourselves, because that's where we get stuck at. And so to overcome that, try new things. If human knowledge is expanding every 12 hours, yeah, you're not going to be relative if you're not willing to step out and step up. I love this conversation. I can talk about this all day long. Before we have about 5 more minutes here. Audrey, Yvette, you have hung in there now during 2 sessions. Do you have any questions for Jerry? You have him on the line. You get to ask him some personal, either about coaching individuals, companies, or do you have a comment for him? Please feel free to share and unmute yourself, or even add it into the chat. We would love to hear from you. And then on that note, Jerry, make sure everybody they know how to get a hold of your book. If they want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Absolutely. So the way to connect with me or get my book is to go to 𝗟𝗲𝗱𝗀𝗋.com, 𝗟𝗲𝗱 Valentine. But actually, you know what? I own both URLs. So if you type J by mistake, I'll still get you. 𝗟𝗲𝗱_Valentine.com/book.
Love it. So everybody go out and get that. Also,
and let me tell you, I'll tell you something. I'll tell you something else. So if right now, because I've launched, I've done a special for the ebook. You can get the ebook for just $2.99.
Awesome.
So if you go to 𝗟𝗲𝗱𝗀𝗋, 𝗟𝗲𝗱𝗀TINE.com/book, and you click on the purchase link, you go to Amazon, you can download the ebook for $2.99, or even better, on my website, 𝗟𝗲𝗱𝗀TINE.com, you can download the first chapter of the book for free.
Oh, there you go. I love it. Again, we didn't plan any of this. This bonuses. I love giving away bonuses. Yeah, who doesn't love to get a bonus?
Exactly. And download the first chapter, 𝗟𝗲𝗱𝗀TINE.com/book. If you like it, then purchase the full book. But you get to look at the first chapter for free.
Fabulous. I love it. So let me ask, what would you tell people? What's your biggest piece of advice, if you will, just for moving forward today, just today? If somebody's thinking, man, this sounds good, I'm excited, I'm glad I listened to this. However, you don't know my situation. What would you say to them?
The first thing I would tell them, the foundation for all of this is where I started, that adversity, fear, paralysis cycle. Be on the lookout for that adversity, fear, paralysis cycle in your life. Now, it happens in all kinds of ways. I gave a corporate example. It's also that person who might have made a bad financial decision, and now they're making one bad decision after another and just digging themselves deeper in the hole. That's that adversity, fear, paralysis cycle. Some of us have had friends we've known who've been in bad relationships, and they say they're trying to make their way out, but they're just making one bad decision after another. That's the adversity, fear, paralysis cycle. We could even say that we can observe it on a national scale. So we're going through a pandemic right now. Almost 600,000 people have died. That's more people than in World War I and World War II put together. And we're still denying, some people are still denying it. That's that adversity, fear, paralysis cycle. When you become aware of those cycles in your life, that's when you can break out. When you realize that, okay, I'm in this cycle, what is it that I'm afraid of? All right, now I need to make a different decision from that place of fear. That's the thing I would give you.
I love it. Love that. Well, Mr. Valentine, it has been a pleasure having you on here today. Yvette, did you want to offer some words?
Yes, thank you, Jerry. This has been very enlightening and insightful. Such a topic of importance and relevance right now with everything we're dealing with in during the COVID. I always say fear is false evidence appearing real, because it becomes your reality as if you continue to soak it in and think about it. But so I have a question. I wanted to get your thoughts on, how do you, in your principles, how do you help people understand how to deal with the fear of things that are really beyond their control? Let's take, for example, a corporate situation where, the glass ceiling is there and it sort of predicts where you can go, how far you can go, but yet you know that there is a greater potential, in you. So you don't want to fall into that paralysis of what they expect of you, but there's only so much you can do within the parameters that have been presented to you.
So what I'll thank you, Yvette. You got very real with that, with what happens when we have limits that are placed upon us. I talk about this a great deal in the book, because coming along my path, there were many people who looked at me and said, for many reasons, and said, oh, you cannot do that. So a story I talk about in the book is when I grew up very overweight. So by the time I was in 9th grade, I weighed well over 250 pounds. And I, despite my weight, and in fact, in an effort to try to live healthier, I went out for high school soccer. Now, granted, my high school did not have many athletes. It was a very small high school. Anybody who wanted to be on the team got to be on the team. However, the soccer coach was appalled that there was this fat Black kid who had the audacity to try to join his team. I was also a scholarship kid at a very exclusive private school, so there was a whole other barrier there. And this adult, did like everything he could in the world to discourage me, to humiliate me, but I never quit. And one of the things I learned from there was to never quit. But the story didn't end there. So 25 years later, during the final miles of my first Ironman distance triathlon, which would turn out to be the first of 8 I would ultimately finish, those soccer days came in handy. Because so for people who don't know, an Ironman, it's a combination of a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, and a 26.2 mile run, a full marathon at the end, all done concurrently in one day. And elite athletes will talk about how torturous this is. This is going to be at minimum a 9-hour effort for the best athletes in the world, and for middle Black people like me, it's like 13 hours, and you have as long as 17 hours to finish. So really tough thing, right? But for me, it wasn't as hard as those soccer days, because nothing was ever going to be that hard again. So Yvette, one of the things I would tell your client is, eventually you have to make an analysis of whether that situation is the right situation for you. And it's a complex analysis. So it's not something I would attempt to do without knowing the client. But then what he or she needs to recognize is that the tough times you're going through there and the people who are trying to drag you down are ultimately making you stronger. And one of the things that I talk about in the book, I call it the power of persistence, is how to take that energy from the people that I call destructive detractors and turn that into your rocket fuel. So we're all gonna, whether it's about our weight, our gender, our race, or something else about us, we are all going to face people along the way who are those destructive detractors and try to place that glass ceiling above us. I believe the way to break through is to do a clear assessment of your situation and then learn how to turn that negative energy into your rocket fuel. I hope that helps.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Fabulous. Well, we went a few minutes over, but I think it was worth it. And thank you everybody for joining us. And we will make sure that we get this out to everyone tomorrow in the next 24 hours. If you're listening to this, then or you're looking for this, you can look for it on our YouTube channel at Soar YouTube channel. Of course, the Soar Media app. Make sure you download that and look for the Coach Uplift Weekly playlist, and this will be there along with, now it has a video player so you can watch the video along with the transcript. Everything will be provided in the one location. But most importantly, we want to thank Gerry for taking time out, being here today, sharing his newly published book, Thrive. What's the entire what is the entire title?
The title is The Thriving Mindset: Tools for Empowerment in a Disruptive World.
So relevant right now and always.
Oh, yes.
So
always.
And always go to 𝗟𝗲𝗱𝗏𝗋𝗋𝗋.com/book. Take advantage of his offer. Download the first chapter and then make the decision if you want to either get the ebook or just go to Amazon and buy it. You're going to utilize this throughout your life, it sounds like. So Gerry, thank you again for taking the time to be here. And
thank you.
And everybody will tune in next Thursday, as always, for Coach Uplift Weekly. And we look forward to seeing you and hearing more about your stories. Thank you all.